Elementary school was Paul Laurence Dunbar.
Okay.
And my junior high was started Flasher, and high school was Ben Franklin.
Okay.
They were all around the same area. Oh, well, no, not the elementary school was closer to where I live, but you know where I started Flasher.
Did you do any musical things at school?
Oh, no, my school did. See, I started when I was in my 20s, so I was out of school then.
Yeah.
And I didn't get into music till I connected with my brother-in-law.
So you weren't in any school bands or?
I wasn't playing then. I didn't have a clue about an instrument.
What did you think that you might want to be, since you came to your realization late that you wanted to be a professional bassist? What did you think you were going to be once you reached adulthood, or hadn't you made up your mind and you're kind of like, you know?
I was a furniture reupholsterer.
Okay, yeah, I know
Yeah,
that, and
yeah.
that's what you were interested in doing.
Yeah,
designing.
and that's why I told that supervisor or manager before I went on the road. I wasn't about to leave that steady job to play music and then not have any, and wouldn't have a job to come back to if it didn't work out. So that was the situation.
So that was your day gig for how many years?
I would say maybe 2 or 3 years at the very most.
Okay.
And before I made the transition to go on the road with Bahama the Beetle.
So you did that like after high school? That upholstering job?
Yeah,
And then, until you left? become-
exactly, yeah.
Right. At these jam sessions at your house, were any musicians that we may have heard of or that became notable later?
Yeah, Reggie Workman used to come there,
Okay.
Arthur Harper, 2 fine bass players. And I recall sitting on the sidelines and watching them play. It was although in my house, my jam session, but I used to watch them play, and I learned something from watching them. And they were very friendly and sharing and giving and so forth. And I remember, and Kenny Barron used to make those sessions too, from what I recall. And I remember one time somebody said, McCoy Tyner's at the door. But McCoy was already a successful musician, so I said, I know he's not coming to this jam session. But what had happened is he had tried to get in touch with Harper or Reggie. He was trying to get in touch with one of them, and he heard that they were at my place. So he came down, and I met him, and he transacted business with whoever it was he came to see.
He didn't play though?
No, he didn't. No, he was way beyond me at that time.
So now what's the exact address of your home where you were having the jam sessions on 12th Street?
1935.
1935 12th Street.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Well, Temple is there now, but I'm not sure if a dorm is there or a classroom or building class building.
It was like a row home or?
It was a row home, yes.
And was there a lot of, you said there were some bars around there. What kind of music was going on when you were growing up? Did you hear live music in the neighborhood?
Yeah, in fact, I used to, the 2 places I recall most, I used to hear everybody on those radios. I remember hearing Elvis Presley for the first time on one of those, in one of those bars. And also, my parents eventually got a TV, but I remember the whole neighborhood would go down to these bars and watch the fights, the Joe Louis and Sugar Ray Robinson fights. I mean, there would be hundreds of people, outside listening and trying to see that little television, They would check out those fights.
But the music?
But the music, they would just play whatever was popular at the time. I remember hearing Blue Haze by Miles Davis. And then the next thing I know...
You're talking about like jukeboxes now, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
I would hear Blue Haze by Miles Davis, and the next thing I know here was Elvis Presley with My Blue Suede Shoes and things like that. But there was also a theater at 11th and Market, the Earl Theater.
Oh, yeah.
And they had some tremendous acts there. And I remember seeing Lionel Hampton for the first time, and he had this big hit, Flying Home. And I couldn't wait to go to the theater to hear him. And I remember hearing, I think I saw Sarah Vaughan there, a lot of artists during that time. So I was really in touch with the music, but not as an artist.
Now, the Earl closed in the early 50s.
Yeah.
So you were going to see these acts before you were involved in music.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
I was in my 20s, like I said, when I started
Right.
music. So all of that stuff took place way
Yeah,
before
yeah,
I started playing.
Eddie would tell me that, because believe it or not, my mother's uncle was a guard, a policeman. That on his off hours, he was one of those, what do they call them, just guards? That would be at
Security
the.
guard.
Security guard at the Earl Theater. So
Oh,
she-
really?
Yeah,
Okay.
he used to sneak her in all the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so she could see the shows. But Eddie Green told me he was inspired to become a musician by seeing a show at the Earl Theater.
No surprise.
Yeah.
But speaking of guards, I remember my father was an air raid warden, and he had, I mean, like a dozen of those bright yellow raincoats and those hats that they wore. And I remember seeing those in the basement. I said, "What the hell is this?" And he explained what it was. That's what the air raid wardens wore.
During the
And-
war.
During the war, yeah. The city would be blacked out, and they would go around with the flashlights, making sure people were safe, were in their homes, and so forth.
What was your father's first name?
Colbert, Colbert.
Oh, okay. Oh. All right, let me ask you about when you first met, well, I'll ask you this since we're just talking about Eddie. When did you first meet Eddie? And how old were you? And how did the whole catalyst come to be?
You know what? I really don't recall the years that I met Eddie. I would have to look at some of the CDs to even tell you what that period.
You
But
should probably stay for the camera. She's talking about Eddie Green, the pianist. Somebody who's watching this might not know.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
yeah, well, I would have to look at the CDs, some of those dates to tell you when we really connected. But we ended up playing somehow with somebody, and I remember there was a definite artistic connection and personal connection too, because we remained good friends over the years. And I remember that connection. We really hit it off.
You were both involved with the model cities in the 60s, right?
Yeah, I was appointed director of the music department, and we had 500 students and 13 people on the staff. And when I came, and I think Odean Pope and Sherman were already on staff there. And when I was appointed to be director, I remember bringing Eddie in as well.
Okay.
And we also had some female teachers, which was very good because you know the history of women being considered second class, you know. But I remember one of the string players was on staff there, and the saxophonist, another saxophonist, was on staff there, and I remember liking that because when I grew up in my household, there was definitely no prejudice and definitely no sexism, you know. In fact, my father's best friends were an Indian named Earl Weekapaw, a Puerto Rican gentleman named James something, I forgot his last name, and his friend was a German. He had a German friend, I can't think of his name either. But he worked for him too. My father was in addition to all that other stuff my father was doing, he was a plasterer and he worked for this German. But he had two black friends as well.
Well, it sounds from what you say with the air raid, that he's very civic-minded and community-minded, your dad.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And like I said, he was also the first African-American bank guard, and that was in Ardmore.
Right.
I still have that image of him in his outfit, you know, and he was proud of the fact that he was appointed to that position.
Were they native-born, were your parents native-born Philadelphians, or did they come from somewhere else?
My mother was born in Culpeper, Virginia,
Okay.
and my father was born in West Orange, Virginia. And I don't know if they got married here and moved here, but they were here when they conceived me. And I have some cousins who ended up moving back there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they're doing well.
So what do you think was the, from what I, after interviewing Odean, because he told us the catalyst kind of came from the model cities. We were all working together and working out stuff together. And can you talk about that? The band. I know a lot of people would be interested in finding out where you came up, because you guys were kind of groundbreaking with the fusion, the jazz fusion. And can you talk about how you worked together? And
That's interesting terminology because the person who heard us described the band as the funkiest band you never heard. And that's that CD there.
right,
And from what I recall, Eddie's popularity really grew, and someone contacted him to give him a recording session. And I remember Eddie said that he didn't want to just go in the studio and do something under his own name, but rather as a group, because he wrote a lot of compositions that were quartet-oriented, And so actually Eddie put that group together, and rather than call it the Eddie Green Quartet, he called it, I think Sherman, the drummer, came up with the name Catalyst. And they were very popular at the time. When they formed their group, I was actually working in Indiana. I was down there recording the play-along CDs with Jamie Abersol.
Oh,
Yeah, and I got the call there to take a teaching position at the Model Cities. And they said if I did that, come back to Philly and do that, they would also want me to be a member of Catalyst. I also met Pat Martino during that time, so I was doing all three things at the same time. But regarding that question, Eddie definitely was the one that initiated that, or was the one that conceived the Catalyst concept.
how did you meet Pat Martino?
I got a call to do a job at in Atlantic City. There's a famous place down there, I cannot think of the name of it, but it was a big band, the Wonder Gardens.
Oh,
Yeah. But there was a big a band was booked there, and I think the female trombonist has something to do with it. Can't think of her name.
Melba Liston?
Melba Lister,
Yeah.
yeah, she has something to do with it. So Pat and I ended up on a job, and we connected there and really enjoyed each other's playing. And he asked me for his number, and shortly afterwards he contacted me to join his band as well. And what I was saying earlier about growing up in an environment that was totally prejudice-free and supportive of women's rights and women and everything, that was a major part of my background, and I continue to support women through the years in their business and whatever endeavors.
Where do you think that came from in your family? Because especially during those years, that's unique that your family felt like that and brought their kids up like that. Why do you think, was your dad a very educated man? Did he go to college, or was he self-educated? Or, I mean, where did all these progressive thoughts come from?
Neither of them were highly educated, but they were both very smart.
Okay.
And my dad was very enterprising. And, but that was just their values. They were very good people. And my dad was one of the most gentle men I ever met, not effeminate, but gentle. And boy, he would cry easy. He was a very sensitive human being. And my mother was a very sensitive human being. And like I said, he went into real estate. He owned about 6 houses, I think. And he assigned me the job to go around and collect rent sometimes. But he also showed me how to do repair work. And he taught me how to plaster, paint, do carpentry, electrical work, and so forth. And so I used to go around and do those jobs. But to tell you what great people they were, I remember recalling One time, I was too busy to go collect the rent, and my mother went to collect rent. And one of the tenants told my mother that she simply didn't have the money, and she didn't want to go back on her promise to promise my father, a promise to promise my father that she would stay on top of her rent because things would come and go rent-wise. And she asked my mother, would she put up the rent for her and not tell my father? And then when her check came through, she would pay my mother back. And she wanted to do that to keep her record straight with my father. Now, my father probably would have agreed to do that too, but my mother did that. I'm thinking, she's supposed to be collecting rent, and she's going to pay somebody's rent. But that's how soft-hearted they were and how kind and generous people they were. Unfortunately, in that particular case, I read in the newspaper the following week that a woman was found deceased in her apartment, and on the table were a bag of groceries, and at the top of that bag was a bag of oatmeal. So this same woman that asked my mother to pay her rent was also down on her luck, and my father had left these groceries in the place for her, but she passed away.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a sad situation.
But it sounds like you came from a very well-supported childhood.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had an older brother and sister. Unfortunately, my brother passed away from a fall when he was 44. He had a fall, went into a coma, never really came out of it. But my sister is older than me, and she's in a nursing home now.
Now, let me ask you, I know you said you played at Peps, and are there any other clubs that you can remember that you really enjoyed playing in? I know Jimmy Oliver used to play a place that was real popular in town. Now I'm drawing a blank.
It was on Columbia Avenue.
No, there's another one. Mott Street. Mott Street? No, I forget. But anyway, can you remember some of the clubs that you, like in the 60s, that you, even if it's neighborhood clubs that you would play?
No, I don't recall.
Really?
No, I remember Pets because it was like a big break for me because major artists came through there. But the local places, no, I don't remember their names.
How about the Showboat? Did you play there?
I played the Showboat too. Yeah, that was on the same level as Peps.
Right. Those were the two, like you were saying, where the big name acts would come.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they were a cut above all the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I used to see Miles there. I saw Mingus there. Oscar Peterson, sorry, with Ray Brown, and all those artists during that time.
Now, what were, when you were in Philly, more or less, during these years, what were some of the notable musicians that were around town and playing from Philadelphia?
Well, you just mentioned one of them was Jimmy Oliver. He was very popular. He was a huge sense of humor.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is appropriate, but one of the humorous things he said was, not mentioning names, but a mutual friend of ours passed away, and he came to the service, and he walked up to the casket and was talking. So afterwards, somebody said, "What were you saying, Jimmy?" He said, "I told him that I apologize for being late, but I didn't want to rush and be all out of breath like he was." That's the kind of sense of humor Jimmy had. He was hilarious. But if that person was alive, he would have laughed too, because that's the way it was, you know. And a lot of times when musicians, I'm probably sure you're aware, there's a lot of musicians joke with each other and put each other down. It's actually an expression of affection, because it wouldn't take time to joke it with somebody that you didn't like or feel close to.
Jim Miller told me something funny. After Eddie died and at his service, you were playing the service with Jim Miller and the sax player, what's his name? The guy from the LaRose. Oh God, I'm losing it.
Tony Williams.
Tony Williams. And Rufus Harley came in with his bagpipes and leaned over right into the coffin where Eddie was and started playing right into the coffin. And Jim told me that you turned over and said, Eddie would have hated that.
There were two instruments that Eddie hated, bagpipes and clarinet. And what's funny is we had an opportunity to play with Frank, the famous clarinetist,
Buddy DeFranco?
Yeah.
Buddy DeFranco. And he loved Eddie. And I'm thinking, boy, he don't know. Eddie can't stand your instrument. Eddie can't stand your instrument. But he loved Eddie's playing, you know. Yeah, but that's an interesting story about Rufus. And I probably said that to Jim, but I don't remember.
Well, I remember he came into the Latham when Eddie and I were working there so much, Rufus, and came right in front of the piano and started playing, and Eddie said, go sit down. But,
Wow.